Hi, my name is Kemen Dumas, and I want to talk to you just for a moment about fighting a new fight. You know, sometimes we can fight the wrong battles in our lives, or we can get caught up in the wrong things, and what that does oftentimes is delay us from where God has taken us, delay us from our purpose, delay us from what God has been doing in our lives. And I want you in this season, and honestly for the rest of your life, to fight a new fight. And what do I mean when I say fight a new fight? Well, Paul says something to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:12. He says this: fight the good fight of faith. And so if you're fighting the good fight of faith, there's also something that can happen if you're not fighting the fight of faith. And what is that fight? That fight is the fight of the flesh. And so we don't want to bring ourselves to the place where we're fighting the fight of the flesh. Ephesians 6:12 says this. It says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood," right? So that means that we cannot choose, or it's important for us to recognize that our fights in life, the things in which we have to battle, is not a fleshly fight, but it is a fight of faith. Fight on holding on to who God is, holding on to what God says, holding on to the things of God, so that we can be and go and do all of what God is calling us to. And overall, the most important thing, honor God with our lives, right? Because when we choose to fight our fights in the flesh and not our fights in the faith, what happens is, and what is shown to us and what is shown to God really, is that we don't really trust God with who he is, what he's done. And so that is super important for us. Another thing that happens when we start to fight in the flesh is that we get exhausted. You know, many of us, we fight these fights in the flesh, and we get tired, we get exhausted, we burn out. And so it's important that we choose faith. Because the enemy has this goal in our lives, and that goal that he has in our lives is to distract us. He wants to distract us. He wants to get us off focus, because if he can distract us, if he can get us off of focus, he can either get us to be stagnant, he can get us to move slow, he can get us to get off of track and lose our focus of where God is taking us. Overall, doing what? Taking our eyes off of Jesus, taking our eyes off of who God is, what God is doing, where God is leading us. And so that's super important for us not to get caught in the distractions. And so when you know you're fighting the wrong fights, how do I know that I'm fighting the wrong fights? Or how do I know that I'm fighting the fight in the flesh? There is this desire for control, or when you lean more into your comfort, or when you are always seeking validation, and when you're living your life in greed and lust, and your ego gets in the way, you're fighting the fight in the flesh. How do you know that? Well, when you're constantly in that fight or in that struggle for control, it's telling God that you don't trust God with his plan, and you don't trust God with where he's leading you. And so we want to lose that control. And oftentimes losing that control does mean coming out of the place of comfort. Many times where God calls us, where God leads us, where God is taking us, it calls us into the place of the uncomfortable, because faith isn't going to lean into your comfort. Faith is always going to call you into a life, into a place, a mindset of living uncomfortably. It is required of us as believers to follow and to be obedient to God and to what God is saying and what God is doing, despite what may be comfortable to us. When you're fighting the good fight of faith, what does that look like? Well, that looks like you're obedient to whatever God is telling you to do, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how disruptive it is to what you thought your plan for your life would be. You are staying in the place of purity. What does that mean? That your heart is pure unto God. That despite what you may have to walk through, despite what you may be going through, you stay and you remain honorable and pure before God. You put your trust in God. You put your faith in God. You put your belief in God. You trust God for not only who God is, but what God is able to do. And what it ultimately looks like is this word that sometimes we run from: surrender. Sometimes we can run from surrendering things to God because we think that we know what's best, but we have to trust that God knows what's best for our life. The greatest battle that we have in our life, it isn't against people. It isn't against the things that are coming against you. No, the greatest battle that you have in your life, and I always say it like this: your fight is this: keeping your eyes, keeping your focus on Jesus, keeping your focus on the Lord. And so there is a version of you that wants to resist God. What is that version of you that wants to resist God? The flesh, because the flesh wants what it wants. The flesh wants to lean into your sin nature. So you have to keep your focus on who God is, where God is leading you, what God is doing. As long as the enemy can keep you away from keeping your focus on God, the enemy is doing what he desires to do in your life. He doesn't need you to have a whole bunch to do, but as long as he can keep you outside of looking at God, he's achieving what he desires for your life. And so we want to lean into who God is. We want to lean into God's purpose. We want to lean into God's plan. We want to lean into God's will, that God's will be done in our lives. And that comes through fighting the good fight of faith. So today I want to encourage you to fight a new fight.